From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Thank you very much, Ollie. How you doing? Welcome to Tuesday's Richie Allen Show. Hope you've had a good bank holiday weekend and you're refreshed and relaxed and raring to go. First, the Richie Allen Show of the week got some terrific guests lined up for you between now and Thursday, including this evening. Terrific stuff. You can tweet the programme right now. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. That's my handle. Tweet me.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show. It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Now, I'll be joined in the second hour of the programme by the documentarian, the author, and the founder of the Consumer Conscious Network, Mel Vee. And we're going to be talking about reporting on satanic ritual abuse. Yes, we are. Could it be that satanic ritual abuse is really happening and that those who wish to cover it up are perpetrating hoaxes, set somebody up to claim that SRA happened to them and then disprove it to supplant in people's minds that it's all a fantasy? Mel Vee joins the programme in the second hour. I'm really looking forward to that. Hugely important issue. What with the court case of Carl Booth, aka Nick, the man who made the allegations against Edward Heath. That's ongoing as well at the moment. So Mel Vee joins the programme in the second hour. So this hour then, to wind up or to round up the EU election results, Mark Collett, the author and podcast host, returns to the programme. Mark joins me in about 20 to 25 minutes time. We'll take a look at the result for the Brexit Party, what it all means, the leadership contest that's about to kick off in the Conservative Party, and we'll also talk about one or two other issues as well, including the protests by families in Birmingham, Asian families protesting against schools teaching LGBT lessons to their children. So I know that Mark Collett's got an interesting point of view on that as well. It's Tuesday's programme, and as I said, you can tweet me with a comment. I look forward to hearing from you. Here's a story straight up even. Sky News running on their website this afternoon, and their afternoon talk show or news show is covering it as well. On the website it reads, Syrian regime forces drop banned cluster bombs on Idlib and target hospitals. So Sky News is claiming that it's uncovered evidence that Syrian regime forces are bombarding hospitals with a banned weapon. Sky News says that it's seen first-hand evidence that hospitals in Idlib are being targeted by the Syrian government, who also appear to be using banned cluster bombs as they ratchet up their bombardment of the last rebel stronghold in the country. Who's saying this? Well, Sky News reporter Alex Crawford, that's who. She's saying that the Syrian government and Russia, or the Syrian government or Russia, is deliberately attacking medical facilities and civilian areas. Alex Crawford says this is deemed a war crime under international law. Right. But her pal Kay Burley, from the comfort of her studio in London, has this to say.
Syrian government forces have struck two villages on the edge of Idlib in the heaviest day of airstrikes since launching a campaign in the area a month ago. That's according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights.
Kay says that's according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. Kay doesn't endorse the story on Sky's own website that claims that Sky itself has witnessed these crimes in Idlib. That's very interesting. Now, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights is a little fat t-shirt seller in Coventry who goes by the name of Rami Abdul Rahman. Now, you might not be surprised to learn, especially if you've listened to this programme for years, you'll know that he's a convicted criminal. You couldn't make this shit up. Not only is he a convicted criminal, but he won't share his data with other journalists, and he won't throw any light on his methodology. So he's just a bit of a liar, really. But the UK media, when reporting on Syria, and when reporting on war crimes, invariably says, we've got this from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, it really is a little fat t-shirt seller in Coventry. That is not a joke. It isn't a punchline. It's the truth. That's your source. That's your go-to source in the UK media on what's going on in Syria. Wait till you hear Dominic Waghorn. He's a regular guest on Kay Burley's show. He's Sky's Foreign Affairs editor, is he? He's one of their Foreign Affairs reporters anyway. He explains what's going on in Syria to Kay. Before we hear from Dominic, every time Dominic tells a porky pie, you'll hear this sound. Yeah? Did you get that? Lovely. So here's Dominic Waghorn telling Kay about the terrible Syrian government forces and their Russian counterparts bombing hospitals in Idlib.
Well, we're going to have a UN Security Council meeting in around half an hour to discuss what is going on and what can be done about it. A few weeks ago, you probably remember, we had various diplomats, one French diplomat, the ambassador to the UN there, standing in the same place outside the Security Council, saying the last thing that can be allowed to happen and the world can allow to happen is a repeat of what happened in Aleppo. But what's happening now? Well, it's a different terrain. It's open countryside, but also amongst that are these very densely populated cities and towns, and the scenes that we saw in Aleppo are being played out again in these towns in Idlib, as we can see here. These are white helmets, civil volunteers going in to pull people out of the rubble of buildings that have been flattened by Russian or Syrian warplanes. And it's a replay of the Aleppo playbook, which is advanced munitions being dropped from the sky and by artillery into densely packed urban areas, but also what seems to be a repeat of the deliberate targeting of hospitals and medical facilities. The World Health Organization saying that one medical facility has been hit every day for the last few weeks. And we're going to hear from Alex Crawford, who's one of the few foreigners who's got into this region to reporting that, confirming what appears to be deliberate targeting by Russian or Syrian warplanes of medical facilities.
Right, so it's a pack of lies. It's a pack of lies, because it's the same liars telling the same old lies and using a fat t-shirt seller from Coventry as their source. And I love the contradiction in Sky today. You've got Dominic Waghorn there dropping in the name of Alex Crawford, whom I mentioned earlier on, is a Sky News reporter based in the Middle East. But Burley wouldn't mention her in the introduction, mentioning this guy Abdul Rahman. Crawford has been mentioned a few times, but I haven't seen the report. It certainly wasn't available just before I came on air at 5 o'clock UK time today. Friend and colleague Jean-Anne Crowley, listening to this in the west of Ireland, says it's very funny that the t-shirt seller, it shouldn't be, of course, but it is hilarious. It is hilarious. Of course, the shame of it is most people watching Sky News and the BBC who use this guy, Rami Abdul Rahman, all the time. Most people have no idea what he is. They have no idea that he was in prison in Syria 3 times. Right? And he can't go back there, because if he does, he'll be banged into prison again. For good reason. So Dominic Waghorn, there are enough horse shit there to fertilise the Sahara Desert, no doubt. You see, the problem for the regime in Tel Aviv and the regime in DC, and the regime in Tel Aviv owns the regime in DC, it's that the last of the nutters, the last of the head choppers, the jihadis, that they financed and sent to burn and rape Syria, are now trapped in Idlib. And the Syrians and the Russians are finishing them off. This is the truth of it. And you can trust me, because I don't work for RT. I'm not travelling to Syria on the Syrian government expense account. So you can trust me. I'm telling you the truth. This is not conjecture. It's the truth. I'm in the pay of nobody. The last of the lunatics are in Idlib, and the Syrians and Russians are finishing them off. And as reported on this programme last September, the Syrian government, to its credit, and I reported on it, did all it could to avoid a massacre. It set up a demilitarised zone, didn't it? You remember that back in September? And it declared a ceasefire around the terrorist-occupied area to give people a chance to get out. But the jihadi nutters rejected the chance to end it and kept on bombing Hama, nearby Hama, from Idlib. Again, this is the truth. And I don't believe for a minute that the government, combined with Russian forces, are targeting hospitals or children. Why would they? Why would they do that? It's not in their interest. Even if they are the most malevolent grouping, coming together, hellish organisation that we've ever seen. Even if they would not bomb hospitals and target children. It's just more lies by the same old liars. Right. Not going well for the Tel Aviv, for the Paris, for the London, for the Washington-backed jihadis. Their time is nearly up in Syria. Now, Tony Blair's former spin doctor, Alastair Campbell, has said today that he's been thrown out of the Labour Party. Why? Because he voted for the Liberal Democrats in the European elections. This is Campbell on the night of the What did he do? Yes, this is Campbell on the night of the count confirming that he did vote for Lib Dems.
I voted Liberal Democrat. I didn't vote Labour for the first time in my life.
Wow.
And it was a very, very strange feeling, but I just felt on this issue, at this time, I think the Labour Party has let its own supporters down, it's let its own members down, and I think it's let the country down in the way that it has failed properly to devise a policy that the party and the country could unite around, and the way that it failed to campaign. As a campaigner, I mean, fair play to Nigel Farage's party, they campaigned.
Yeah, that's right. So, Alastair Campbell has been thrown out of the Labour Party for voting for the Liberal Democrats. Imagine that. This is the same Alastair Campbell who had to resign his position in Tony Blair's government back in 2003 for the part that he played in the dodgy dossier. The dossier about the Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, the pack of lies that led to the murder of millions of people in Iraq. Campbell had to resign. But 16 years later, they eventually throw him out because he voted for the Lib Dems. You couldn't make it up. Staying with Labour for a minute, it's 15 minutes past the hour, by the way. It is the Richie Allen Show, live on Fab Radio 2 here in Manchester. Triggerwarning.tv, my website, richieallen.co.uk, and TuneIn Radio and plenty of other places. Hey, before we talk more about the Labour Party, every weekday morning from here on in, from 9:30 a.m, that's UK time, I'll be live on YouTube looking at the daily newspapers. So get that into your skulls now. Every weekday morning, Monday to Friday. It won't be the best thing you've ever seen in your life, but it won't be dull either. I'll just be looking through the papers and having a chat with you for about 25 minutes every weekday morning from now on. And it doesn't affect the radio show and the output. That stays the same Monday to Thursday and Sunday morning. Yeah. So back to Labour. So the Equality and Human Rights Commission has launched a formal investigation into the Labour Party about anti-Semitism. Now, this is a watchdog, of course. It's a government watchdog, and it told Labour 2 months ago that it had received a number of complaints and was therefore considering what it would do next. So it's announced today that it will now formally look into whether Labour has unlawfully discriminated against, harassed or victimised people because they are Jewish. Good God in heaven. Unlawfully discriminated, harassed or victimised people because they are Jewish. The party, of course, has been plagued by these accusations of anti-Semitism since 2016, and of course this wouldn't be going on if the useless bearded muppet Jeremy Corbyn had just taken it on, head on, but he hasn't. So this has made the news today. The journalists were chasing Jeremy Corbyn down the street outside his house. Jeremy did what Jeremy does. Thank you, goodbye, thank you, goodbye, thank you, goodbye, thank you, goodbye. And then he runs away. Corbyn said he's getting to grips with the issue and has beefed up the party's disciplinary procedures. But the Zionists in the UK have been rushing to the microphone. Mike Katz, who chairs the Jewish Labour movement, said, "We have been warning for years that the Labour Party's response to anti-Semitism has been woeful at best and institutionally racist at worst." There you go. It was him and the Jewish Labour movement that took the step of going to the EHRC, the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So the campaign against anti-Semitism, which has been mentioned many times on this programme, our old enemies, Gideon Falter, that proper clown, this charity, which isn't really a charity but operates as a charity, the Witchfinder General, the campaign against anti-Semitism, They've said in 4 chilling years, Corbyn has turned the party which pioneered anti-racism into the party that now finds itself in the company of the BNP, being investigated by the very equality and human rights regulator it fought so hard to establish. Jeremy Corbyn himself is an anti-Semite and unfit for any public office, and though few have acted, most Labour MPs seem to agree with us. Here's Sky News' Rob Powell, who's been following this.
And you really feel like they're reaching something of a crescendo with this intervention by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission today. Now, they wrote to Labour a little bit earlier this year, saying that they had concerns, they'd had complaints about what had been going on in relation to anti-Semitism. Now they've said they're going to launch a formal inquiry, a formal investigation. In terms of what they're looking at, they'll be looking at whether unlawful acts have been committed by the party, whether they'd implemented those recommendations from a review that was carried out into anti-Semitism a few years ago, and whether their rulebook is basically up to scratch. Now, this matters because as part of this, they can speak to senior Labour figures, they can interview people working at the Labour Party, they can also get access to correspondence and emails from the Labour Party as well. Now, Labour has sort of hit back at this in quite strong terms, actually, today. They've said that as a party, they're implacably opposed to anti-Semitism and have released a statement in which they say, "We reject any suggestion that the party does not handle anti-Semitism complaints fairly and robustly, or that the party has acted unlawfully, and will continue to cooperate fully with the Equalities and Human Rights Commission," also suggesting in that statement that funding had been cut from this body and that was undermining its ability to do its job, and also pointing the finger at the Conservative Party and saying that they needed to tackle racism within their own ranks as well.
Yes, as we've seen with organisations like Kick It Out, the sporting anti-racism body, and others, when their funding is on the wane, the best thing to do strategically is to find more racism. The more racism you can find to justify your existence, the more funding you'll eventually get. Now, Mark Collett will join the programme in a couple of minutes' time. He'll be talking about this next issue. Later on, Mel Vee joins the programme to talk about satanic ritual abuse, but she's got a really interesting take on it, does Mel. Can't wait to speak with her, the Consumer Conscious Network, Mel Vee. Before that, though, Peter Tatchell, who's been a regular guest on my programmes for many years and was only on with me a few weeks ago talking about this issue. He says that the fear of LGBT inclusive lessons harks back to the 1980s. He's juxtaposing the parents in Birmingham, mostly Asian parents at the moment, but there are a lot of white parents as well, let's be honest about it, and maybe Hispanic parents who are not happy with 4-year-old children being asked to try and comprehend their sexuality and the vast spectrum of sexualities. So Peter says it's a very sad indictment on our society where a relatively small number of parents can create a hue and cry that leads to teachers and schools across the country rowing back on what they know and believe to be necessary, he says. So you know that this has been kicking off in Birmingham for weeks when parents claimed the school's No Outsiders programme was promoting LGBT ways of life. This is where it all began. The school's award-winning equality lessons were suspended in March after weekly demonstrations by mostly Muslim parents and activists there. We've seen similar protests across Birmingham, Manchester and East London. Peter Tatchell says this is having a chilling effect on many other schools. And that's Peter Tatchell's point of view. I argued this with him a few weeks back and told him that children should be allowed to figure out what they are and what they think. You see, what's really, really sickening about all of this is creating a world and a society where you have to constantly affirm vocally and by your actions that you toe the establishment line on everything. And again, this is not coming from gay and lesbian folks or transgender folks. This is coming from a darker place entirely. And what they want is they want everybody to avow or to affirm, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with this and that. I totally think that what you do with your life is great. Whether I do or whether I don't doesn't matter. How you live your life, what you do, your sexuality, I've got to publicly affirm in some way or another that I agree with it, that I think it's absolutely fine, that I am not homophobic, That's what this is all about, ultimately. And I had this argument with Tatchell a few weeks back when I said to him, what you're trying to impose on people is thought policing. And Tatchell says, why do we have to live with people who dislike gay people? And I said, well, pucker up, Buttercup. You've got to. You've got to. There are people in this country who don't like Irish people. This is a fact. I know this. I've met some of these people. They view Irish people with suspicion. They think they've got these old stereotypical views of Irish people that we're a bit thick, that we drink a lot. They're right there. Or that some of us are, or that we are inclined to hate the UK and that we are inclined towards support for terrorism. So what do you do about those people? And I said the same thing to Tatchell. People should be allowed to think whatever they want, like it or lump it. Anyway, that's where this is going. One of the parents is a guy called Amir Ahmad, and he was annoyed that his child's school closed yesterday. The school said the parents who were protesting were creating a safety issue. Amir Ahmad was pretty annoyed by that.
We've been protesting for almost half a year now. First at Parkfield School nearby, and now at Anderton Park School. And it's because parents are simply not happy that their children are being taught something that doesn't go with their moral values and family values, which are being completely ignored.
Carry on.
Yeah, they're being completely ignored, and it's just not the way for education to take place. And parents have a right over their children's education, and this is a conservative community that has conservative family values. And that's being completely ignored. And there's about 60,000 children who are affected by this in Birmingham, and there's a much larger number of children nationally that are affected. And this is a national policy by the Education Department to push LGBT teaching to children from the age of 4. That's simply not acceptable to many families all over Britain.
But isn't it a case, Amir, the schools closed early over safety concerns? That's the key point here. I mean, that doesn't benefit the kids, does it?
No, I believe that the school closed earlier because majority of the participants are parents, and the organisers had scheduled the protest for 2:30, which is when school finishes at 3 o'clock. And they simply didn't want, it was a tactic by the school to prevent parents from participating in the protest. But nevertheless, this protest had about 400 participants in it. And there's never been any issue of violence at any of these protests, which have been taking place for the past 6 weeks at Anderton Park.
Yeah, this is going to run and run. It won't be long before schools break up for the summer. I say it won't be long. We're only 5 or 6 weeks away from school holidays, right? Or thereabouts. When did they finish up? The end of June they finish up. They've got July and August off, don't they? Or did they finish in mid-July? I can't remember. But this one will die down in the summer, but it will re-emerge again in the autumn. Have no doubt about that. And I will get into it even with Mark Collett in a second. Before that, though, he and I are going to talk about the European Parliamentary election results. Welcome to the Richie Allen Show. If you're just joining me, it's 26 minutes past the hour. Europe's most listened to independent talk radio show, live on Fab Radio in Manchester, triggerwarning.tv. I'm on TuneIn Radio as well. The programme archives on Spotify, iTunes and Podomatic, where it is the most listened to podcast in the field of news and politics. Now, speaking of podcasts, my first guest is no stranger to this programme. He presents an excellent podcast, so he does. He's an author and a political commentator. And I do recommend, if you haven't checked it out before, check out his book, The Fall of Western Man. Even if you don't agree with it or you think you might be offended by it, check it out. Give it a read. I read it and I found it very, very interesting, and I picked up quite a bit from it. Let's welcome back to the programme, Mark Collett. Mark, welcome back.
Hello, it's great to be back, Richie.
Thanks for coming on. First of all, you're a gentleman, because I asked you on at short notice today. Somebody else left me down. You were the first guy I called. Because it's Brexit, because it's LGBT lessons in school, I knew you'd have something to say. So thanks for coming on, mate. We'll get into the LGBT lessons in a minute. What's your reaction to the result of the European Union Parliamentary election? Depressing as it was to have that election, despite the fact we voted to leave 3 years ago. your impressions of how that's gone. The Brexit Party getting 36% of the vote nationally and getting most MPs, decimation for Labour and the Tories, gains by the Greens and the Lib Dems. What do you think? How do you think it went?
Well, I think it really mixed feelings, to be honest. On one hand, I'm obviously very happy that a party that stands for Brexit as their one exclusive issue was to win that election by such a landslide. And also, it's worth noting, I think I'm correct on this, but they are the single biggest party in the whole of the European Union now. I think the Brexit Party holds more seats than any other party from any country.
That's right.
So that's a real achievement. And also, it's a real middle finger to the EU, because to have the largest party in the EU to be a party that wants the dissolution of the EU, that sends an absolutely huge message. So that's the positive. And there are really good things there. And there's also really good news over on the continent too. But I think the bad news is that Nigel Farage has set up this party. It's a limited company. It's not a political party. It doesn't have members. There's only two shareholders. There's two people on the books of the limited company. There's only one shareholder. There's only one person who has a share in that. I don't know for sure, but I believe that to be Nigel Farage. He has raised a huge amount of money through this limited company, which isn't a political party. And as yet, it has no manifesto. It has no other issues. And quite simply put, it could be characterised as a safety valve party. It has no infrastructure, it has no councillors, it has no branches, no groups, no structure. It is just a vehicle for Nigel Farage.
It was hastily put together, wasn't it, in time for this election. So it's only 6 weeks old. Very good point you're making, and I take it on board. They might say, well, I know we're talking about Farage, of course we are, but the party, in terms of the MEPs elected through the party, they might say, give us a chance and we'll open the party up, we'll make it a bit more transparent, and we'll give people the chance to subscribe and become members and get involved locally, maybe in local elections, maybe in, city council, county council elections. So they might say, Mark, give us a chance, mate. We've only been around a few weeks.
Well, I'm sure they would say that, and I am giving them a chance. As I said, I've not totally written this off. I've said there's very good news about it. But I will say it's a very strange bunch of people. And what I mean by that is I think when these people were selected to go on these MEP lists, they were selected to tick boxes, and because they were names, because they were known people, in some cases celebrities, in some cases political celebrities or the sisters of leading politicians. But all of these people make quite an odd mix, and they aren't people you would normally see sitting together. And some people might say, well, great, he's united people across the political spectrum. But I kind of look at that in a little bit more of a cynical way and say, how long is it going to be before you have people who were once members of the Revolutionary Party who are now sitting with people like Anne Widdecombe? How long is it going to be before those people pull in a variety of different directions and tear this to pieces?
Very good point you're making there, because Farage has been threatening the status quo in Westminster with annihilation in a future general election. As you know, he's been saying, some of our listeners might not know, he's been saying that, look, if we don't leave on October 31st, we will put candidates in the general election and we will see a similar result. But Mark's making a very interesting point here. This motley crew of celebrities and commentators have come together based around their belief that the result of the 2016 referendum hasn't been implemented and must be implemented. But how could you get consensus among those people on domestic issues in terms of putting together a manifesto for a general election? All these people whom, as you've said, are very, very, very different. I'm interested in this public company. You've been looking into this, a limited company, the Brexit Party as a limited company. You've been looking into this. Is that, to your knowledge, unprecedented in UK kind of electoral history?
Well, it's certainly something I'm not familiar with. And just to back up what I said, it's Claire Fox, who was the former revolutionary communist, and she supported Irish republicanism. She opposed the Good Friday peace deal, and she's there with Anne Widdecombe. So that's who I was talking about there. But yeah, for me, this is completely unprecedented, because what it means is the party isn't really a party. It's Nigel Farage's company that people pay a subscription to of £25, and I believe enough people have paid a subscription now for him to have taken, I think it's in the region of £4 to £5 million, but none of those people have any say in how the organisation is run. In fact, none of the MEPs have any say in how the organisation's run. Only one person does, and that's Nigel Farage. So this isn't a party by any stretch of the imagination. I don't believe the Labour Party's run like that. The Conservative Party is not run like that. UKIP certainly wasn't run like that. And the political party that I was once a member of definitely wasn't run by that. It had a proper constitution. It had a way of electing a leader. It has a branch and group structure. It had a council of people who advised the leader, some of whom were elected to that council, some of whom were appointed, and there were checks and balances. But I don't think there is here. And I think Nigel Farage is running it in that way for a very specific reason, because he doesn't want to be told what to do by anyone. He wants it to be run his way, and he wants to have the final say on every aspect. And that's all well and good if this is just going to be a protest party that is essentially dissolved as and when Brexit is achieved. But if this is going to be a movement for change, I don't think it can be, because of the way it's set up. And I also worry that if it's not going to be a movement for change, all that righteous anger will be basically diverted into this party, and when the party dissolves, it'll just be the perfect safety valve for the establishment, because all that anger will dissipate and unfortunately won't cause any lasting damage to the political system that has enslaved the people for so long.
This is really important, because the general election might very well be imminent. I mean, it might very well be imminent. We have a leadership contest about to, well, it's begun in terms of candidates have been putting themselves forward in the Conservative Party, but it's going to really get going in the next few weeks. And I don't believe the country's going to stand for that. I don't believe that the Labour Party are going to stand for that. We might have just lost Mark momentarily there, did we?
No, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I was hearing I was hearing a kind of a ringing noise or a buzzing noise. But so you've got, I think a general election is closer now than it was a couple of weeks ago. And the spectre of all of these people who united behind Farage on this single issue, but they're very different. Annunziata Rees-Mogg, and you mentioned Anne Widdecombe and Claire Fox and David Bull up here in the Northwest and others. The thoughts of them sitting together to formulate a manifesto on a budget, on spending, on policing, law and order, on the environment, it would be a disaster, wouldn't it? You'd have to imagine so.
Well, not only would it be a disaster, but as I said, you'd have everyone pulling in different directions. Yeah. And when parties have that pull, they tend to pull themselves to pieces. They don't form sort of a consensus. They split and they break down. And I think we will see a general election sooner rather than later if Boris Johnson isn't the winner of the Conservative Party leadership challenge. I think if he wins the Conservative Party leadership challenge, he will deliver on Brexit, and he will most likely go out on a limb for a hard Brexit. And I think that's the only thing that can save the Conservative Party now. Even though he voted for May's withdrawal deal at the 11th hour, this is what Farage has been saying about Johnson and one or two others in the race, like Dominic Raab. Farage has said, don't trust these guys to deliver a hard Brexit. They're flip-floppers. They talked the talk until the going really got tough, and then they eventually endorsed May's withdrawal deal. I think that was more down to their will to save their party, because their party is destroyed. And really, this has got to be, there was only one party that fared worse than the Conservatives at the European election, and that was UKIP. UKIP saw the greatest capitulation of any party in post-war British politics, because for a single party to go from winning an election 5 years earlier to not getting a single seat of representation in the current election, that's unprecedented.
What do you put that down to, Mark? Why did UKIP
down to
collapse?
2 things. The Brexit Party is obviously a massive part of that. The Brexit Party put UKIP on life support, and the antics of Sargon of Akkad, aka Carl Benjamin, pulled the plug on that life support and made them completely unelectable. Yeah.
Is there something more nefarious going on there?
I don't know. I think I'm doing a whole live stream about this on Friday, because I've got probably about an hour's worth of discussion on this particular topic. But I think what happened there was a classic case of a group of people who are saying and doing one thing on the internet and reinforcing their belief system by only being around themselves. Then they go into the outside world and try to sell that to normal people, and normal people don't want any of it. And I think his comments, whilst the media have to some degree misquoted him, they are completely unsaleable talking points. They're not things that normal people were talking about. And to have your party or have your candidacy completely centered on these comments about rape, unfortunately for him, and he just doesn't realize this, that's not what normal working folk mean when they say freedom of speech. Normal working folk want freedom to speak about immigration, politically incorrect issues like Islam, LGBT issues. They want the right to call people who are transgender a man or a woman as they see fit. They don't want, or it never even occurs to them that they should have the right to send vulgar tweets to MPs. But to fight your campaign on that issue is just woefully out of touch.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because that's my take on the whole Benjamin thing. I don't know very much about him, but I understand that he likes to explore the whole area of free speech, what is sayable, what isn't sayable. And, you know, that's all very interesting. We've covered it before, you and I, on this programme and separately. But yeah, ordinary people, when it comes to speaking about free speech, or when it comes to discussing free speech, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. They get worried about being criticised or marginalised because they want to talk about radical Islam, as you said, or because they want to talk about religious issues, or they want to talk about, you know, issues of sexuality, or they want to criticise something and they feel they can't do it. I think you're absolutely right. You've hit the nail on the head there. While we're on the subject of UKIP, Tommy Robinson was an advisor to Gerard Batt, and I made a comment on Monday, yesterday morning, that it's no laughing matter that Robinson didn't get his deposit back here in the Northwest, even though I don't like the man, I don't have any time for him, but I would always support his right to free speech and his right to fairness as much as I would anybody else. Robinson had a point, didn't he? Regardless of when he got banned by Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, he had a point insofar as that we now have these behemoths, as I call them, social media companies, which are bigger than any corporations that we ever thought. We never imagined companies could be as big as those. And they can directly impact a national or a local election by banning somebody from their platform, when we all know that the vast majority of people use these platforms. So when Robinson said, I was basically kind of working with one hand tied behind my back from the get-go, he had a point, didn't he?
He certainly did, but I'm pleased you've had me on, actually. So this is quite fateful that I'd be the person to talk about this, because you've got to remember, I was the head of publicity for the British National Party when the BNP won 2 seats at the European elections. So I actually do know sort of the process that goes on here. Now, Tommy Robinson raised over £2 million, I believe, in the last year. Now, his leaflet was absolutely appalling. It was a scrappy A5 leaflet that looked like a Papa John's pizza flyer. It was really quite appalling. And personally, I believe that he let himself down, not in his message, but in the way he conveyed his message. And he made two huge errors of judgment. Firstly, an appalling leaflet, which for the amount of money he's basically raised, he should have been pushing a proper A4 leaflet with proper issues, bullet points, things that stood out, not just a big picture of his own face and vote Tommy, that's not a saleable point to a lot of people. They want to know why you should vote Tommy. But more importantly, everything he did was marred with violence. Now, I'm not saying that's all his fault, but you have to box clever. And in the BNP, we never announced when we were going to turn up somewhere. We turned up, we did our business, we spoke to the public, and we left because we figured out that if you tell everyone where you're going to be, your enemies will turn up and attack you, and the state will facilitate that. And I've just done a video on that. There's a video on my YouTube account. And I'm not saying what happened to Tommy Robinson was right. In fact, it was horrific. But what I'm saying is, a seasoned campaigner and veteran like Tommy Robinson should know that the state will pull these dirty tricks, and you have to be clever. You have to turn up, you have to go in, spend an hour campaigning, then leave. So everything you do there is positive, and you don't give the enemy a chance to turn up at every one of your events and attack you, because he should know, just as you and I know, that the police will not stop those people. In fact, the police will stand by as bricks, bottles and milkshakes are thrown at patriots. And believe me, if it was the other way round, if somebody even walks down the street and shouts something at an MP, they would be arrested straight away. So it's an unfair system, but we know it's an unfair system, and we have to box clever.
Yeah, look, if the police were here, they'd argue with that. They're not. You know, I'll say in their absence, the police will say, listen, we have to police these demonstrations and these events, and we will arrest people. If we see somebody committing an act of public disorder, we will arrest them regardless of who they are. That's what they would say. But I want to make the point, while backing his right to say what it is he wants to say, I believe Robinson is a thug. I believe he's still a thug. I believe he surrounds himself with thugs. He's got a guy working as his security guard, a guy who's an armed kidnapper. I mean, to me, either this is a massive psychological op against people, or Robinson is just another kind of vanity-seeking, or I should say vanity, self-obsessed, publicity-seeking wannabe, and not a genuine campaigner who's genuinely interested in change. I don't know which one of those fits Robinson, but I stand by my assertion he's a thug. I believe he's a thug.
I think he's a genuine person. I think he has genuine concerns. I think he's quite courageous and brave, but I think he's been surrounded by a cabal of very ruthless people who run very ruthless money-making campaigns, people like Ezra Levant, and he is just a pawn. He is being used to present money-making opportunities for people, and every time you see people like Ezra Levant attaching themselves to a campaigner, that campaigner is not used to win political power. They are used to raise vast sums of money for rebel media, which as of yet hasn't made any hasn't made a shred of difference to the world in any way other than to make people very wealthy by making videos on YouTube. And I think Tommy Robinson has been used, and his campaign has been subverted by the usual suspects.
Let's have a chat about what's been going on in Birmingham of late. Talked about this in the monologue. I know you're very interested in it. I know you're a Christian man. You talk a lot about radical Islam. You have done for many years. You have no compunctions about talking about it, about asking questions about radicalisation, and you've taken your fair share of criticism for that over the years, and you and I have bantered back and forth about it on this programme as well. Great to have you on. Mark Collett is our guest. Mark is a broadcaster. He makes a terrific podcast. We'll put a link out to where you can find it if you haven't found it before, or if you haven't heard before, I should say. And he's also written a book called The Fall of Western Man, which I think you should have a listen to. Look, it's obvious that Mark and myself come from very different places politically, but I'm very much interested in hearing his point of view and the points of view of those whom I ordinarily wouldn't agree with. And this is very interesting because you have Asian parents, mostly Asian parents, at least in terms of what we can see on UK news reports, BBC and Sky. And they're going to these schools in Birmingham and they're saying, look, we're not happy with our 4-year-old children being asked to consider very deep issues and, very grown-up issues around their sexuality, whether it's homosexual, whether it's straight, whether it's transgender, whatever. We don't like it. We don't think it's the place of the school to be doing it. And this has gone on for weeks. It's going to go on and on, I reckon, into next year. It's gathering momentum, this. And you find yourself, I suppose, as somebody whom talks about migration, talks about Islam. You've had your issues with aspects of Islamic culture, but you find yourself, I think, in stark agreement with those protesters in Birmingham, in East London and in Manchester.
Oh, I certainly do. And when we talk about radical Islam, we talk about things like forcing women to cover their face or stoning people. Radical Islam, there's nothing radical about Muslims campaigning against children being indoctrinated with LGBT propaganda. In fact, these Muslims are certainly not radical. These Muslims are people that share the concerns of probably 90% of Indigenous Brits. Most people do not want children to be sexualized or to have their innocence taken away with the kind of wicked messages being pushed in this school. The only difference between your average Indigenous Brit and these Muslims is these Muslims still have the strength and sort of willpower to speak out. And the reason being is because the system hasn't oppressed them or made them feel as if they can't speak out. Whereas your average Indigenous Brit would say, oh my gosh, I can't say that because it's politically incorrect. I can't say that because I've got no community left to say that with. These Muslims stand up as a community and they still have the in-group preference to go out there as a group, stand together and try to stop this degeneracy from being pushed upon their children.
Now, you said degeneracy. Hang on. You said degeneracy and you said wicked messages at the school. Give me an example of a wicked message. Mark Collett is our guest this hour. Mark, give us an example of a wicked message that you know is being given to these children at that school.
Well, these children are being taught about what are known as transgender issues. And I believe wholeheartedly and firmly that teaching children of that age that they can change their gender and that a boy can become a girl and a girl can become a boy before they have even reached puberty is absolute nonsense.
Can we be sure, though, Mark? Sorry, I'm not somebody who's prone to interrupt them, but I want to nail this down. How do we know for a fact? Has anybody actually seen a syllabus or a leaflet or a book? How do we know that 4 and 5-year-old children are being told, listen, you might not be male, you might not be female? Is this just us? And by us, I include myself because I share your concerns. But maybe we're jumping the shark a bit here. Maybe they're not actually telling children it's okay to be trans and it's okay to be gay. Maybe they're just saying, listen, there are some different people out there. Just be aware of that and be sensitive to the differences of other people.
Well, let me make this even more explicit then. I believe that children of that age, specifically primary school children, and I would extend this to children who have not passed through puberty, should not be being exposed to any form of sexually charged material. Children are innocent. They are also highly curious. And if you put these innocent little minds who are absolutely curious in front of issues that they cannot possibly comprehend and they are not mature enough to comprehend, either physically or mentally, it will lead to abject disaster.
You don't accept the argument that because we live in a society where people are, I won't say people are different, but we're in a society where children are likely to see boys or young men dressed as women and vice versa. And they're likely to have a classmate. And I don't like this, Mark. I'm not a Christian. I'm not. But I don't like the idea of same-sex adoption. And, I've got very many, and I can say this with the utmost honesty, I've got many gay and lesbian friends I've met over the years through media. Some of them I'm still in contact with. And people whom I love dearly. and some of them agree with me and many of them disagree with me. I like the idea of the mum and dad raising a child, a mother and a father. I know it's not always possible. I don't like the idea of same-sex parenting. But if it's happening, and it is happening a lot, where's the harm in a teacher saying, in a non-kind of controlling or a non-oppressive way, listen, kids, Jane has two mums. You might have noticed that. Well, let me explain to you why. What's wrong with that?
Well, firstly, the important thing here is, and these people shouldn't be adopting. Children need a mother and a father, and that is an ideal. That is an ideal that we should be upholding and promoting. That is something that is proven from thousands of years of evolution and from psychological studies that it is the best for children because they get something different from their mother and something different from their father. And I wrote about that extensively in my book. Now, the fact of the matter is here, they are promoting this as an acceptable alternative lifestyle, which it absolutely isn't.
But that's not fair now. That's your opinion because you're a Christian man. Now, I don't agree with that. This is where you and I part company. I don't believe that a same-sex relationship is unacceptable. Now, I know you and I have had this before. I'm not going to try and score any points off of you. I respect you and I respect your right to your opinion. I don't think you're morally wrong or that I'm morally superior. I do not. I mean, I'm not patronising you. I absolutely respect your right to say that. But I don't agree with that. Most of the people I know don't agree with that or just don't care. They just don't care. I mean, my gay and lesbian friends, the people I've worked with, they're no threat to you or threat to me because they live with another man or another woman. I don't believe that it's unacceptable and that it's wrong. I don't believe that. I didn't
say it was unacceptable. I said it was unacceptable to adopt children.
Yeah.
I said, if you decide that you are going to be with another man, that's absolutely up to you. I don't want you pushing it as a norm, but you have then counted yourself out of childbirth, because childbirth is something that happens between a man and a woman. But every single norm, whether it be a natural norm or a societal norm, is now being perverted. Not only are those things being perverted, but we are holding up the abnormal, not just as normal, but actually as better. We are holding this madness up as the highest virtue. And these Muslims are saying that isn't true.
Why do you say abnormal, Mark? Why don't you say less regular or less?
Because it is abnormal.
Frequency.
But it is abnormal. That's just a fact. It's not an insult. It is just abnormal.
No, I do believe you when you say you're not insulting anybody. I do believe you. And look, I'm not asking you to self-censor. If you want to say abnormal, say abnormal. But I wouldn't say abnormal because we know through recorded history that same-sex relationships have been around since the year dot. And they've always been in the minority. So I would use words like minority or less frequent rather than abnormal, because it, again, you see, I'm contradicting myself here. I'm saying don't self-censor, but at the same time, bit of compassion. I wouldn't consider my gay mates abnormal. Well, I wouldn't consider my gay mates to be abnormal. They're different.
Well, the fact is they are abnormal. Just in the same way that Usain Bolt is abnormal because he can run 100 meters in less than 10 seconds. Abnormal isn't always a bad thing. It's just a statement of fact. And today we get so hung up on things like this. And this is how they control our minds. They control our minds by having us self-censor. So we worry so much about what we're saying. And this is the way that normal Indigenous Brits have got themselves in a situation where they won't even stand up to a system that is indoctrinating their children with sexual perversion. But the Muslim community will, because they haven't been beaten down. And for once, I'm happy to say, I would stand with those people.
But you say sexual perversion there, you see, which is kind of a contradiction to what you said a minute ago about abnormal and Usain Bolt. I don't see it as sexual perversion. I don't think about it very much, and when I do think about it, I've been asked to think about it, it kind of leaves me a bit cold because I'm a straight guy that likes straight women, or one particular straight woman. But you're using terms like sexual perversion.
I can justify that.
Well, let's stay on the theme for a minute, in the few minutes we have, of self-censorship. You've made an excellent point there. It is what the system, let's call it the system, we give it 500 different names. It is what it wants us to do. It wants us to be worried, not just about causing offence, but also about the consequences for ourselves if we cause offence, and I don't want to live in a world like that. I don't think any less of you for using the word abnormal. I like you. I see you as a peer, even though we're at opposite ends of the political spectrum. So I would just have a debate with you and say, maybe abnormal, maybe you might not use that word, but ultimately it's up to you to use that word if you want to use it. But sexual perversion, it's like, I don't know, there's a better way to win the argument, which I think is very strong. Richie? Go ahead.
Have you got children?
No, mate, no. Hopefully in the future.
If you had a son, would you take him to a strip club with you when he was 11?
Of course I wouldn't.
Why?
Because I would... well, you know the answer. Look,
of course I know the answer, but I'm asking you why.
I agree with you here.
But you take him... But if you... And if you did, society would condemn you. But I will tell you this. If you took your 11-year-old boy to a gay pride parade, you would be held up as a wonderful father.
Yeah, but hang on a second. There's a big difference. There's a big difference between a strip club and a gay pride parade.
No, there isn't.
There is.
Well, actually, there is. At a gay pride parade, you would see more stomach-churning acts of sexuality, nudity, and perverse subcultures than you would in a strip club. And people only have to Google very quickly to see people at gay pride events dressed in leather dog outfits being led down the street on leads. Now, that is far worse than what an 11-year-old
Well, I wouldn't.
Yeah,
I certainly wouldn't want any child to be exposed to that, but not because I've got some moral point of view on it, because they're not old enough to comprehend what's going on. Therefore,
why is that
they shouldn't
happening
be
in the street at so-called pride events?
Well, who's bringing the 11-year-olds or the 12-year-olds to pride events? I'd be having a word with their parents, rather than, if that is going on, by the way, at pride events, and you say it is. I've never been to a gay pride parade. Maybe I saw the parade in Manchester one year, maybe a few years ago, passing by maybe, and I didn't see anybody being led around in a dog outfit. However, I'm not saying you're telling lies, but I would ask questions of any parent who knows that might be on view, who would take a child down there. Rather than blame the gay and lesbian men and women who are putting on the parade, I would say to John or Josephine or Jane, what the hell are you doing bringing a child to that for?
But what I'm saying is these gay pride events are public events that take place in broad daylight in open public areas which are there, and you see people taking their children to these events. And what I'm saying is, if you took your boy to a strip club, he would be far less exposed to perversion than if you took him to a gay pride rally. Yet if you took him to a gay pride rally, you would be a hero to these liberal-minded folk. And this is what I'm talking about when I say perversion. I am not saying every single person within the LGBT community is perverted, but what I'm saying is the LGBT agenda is used to push perversion on the masses. And everything I've said can be backed up with a simple Google search.
And you would agree, I think, because I think we've had this out before, that the idea to introduce this to primary school students, to get them to think about and talk about issues of sexuality, is not being driven by ordinary gay and lesbian men and women. It isn't.
No, I am saying that the powers that be use the LGBT agenda like a wrecking ball to destroy Western morality and attack the family unit. And I have just dropped those pictures in the chat bar there so you can see that what I'm saying is absolutely true. Yeah,
like I said, I think I've only ever seen one pride parade here in Manchester. Usually the village is blocked off and you've got to pay a fortune to get into the village over the course of the weekend, but the parade is open to the public. But I didn't see anything that I would have been kind of overtly upset by at the time. But look, again, I'm not impugning what it is you're saying. Mark Collett is our guest. Just before we wrap it up then, it's not coming from ordinary gay and lesbian men and women who just want to get on with their lives like you and I do and everybody else. Why is this being pushed on children then? If it isn't coming from gay and lesbian people who want to brainwash everybody into thinking that their way is the only way, if it's coming from something darker and deeper, why is it? What are they trying to do? What ultimately is the end goal of it?
Well, it's to destroy the West. It's to destroy the West, and it's to ensure that those of European descent are slowly bred out and destroyed. And one of the fundamental and most effective ways to do that is to attack the basis of our society, which is the nuclear family, which is the traditional family, which is the mum, the dad, and the children. Once you rip that apart and destroy it, any society will collapse, and once society collapses, with it goes our wonderful civilization.
Yeah, it's a very interesting read, The Fall of Western Man. Check it out by Mark Collett. Follow Mark on Twitter as well. I'm sure we'll debate these issues again in the very near future. Mark, tell us about Friday and your reflection on the Brexit Party and the Tommy Robinson situation and all the rest of it. Where can people hear that on Friday?
On my YouTube, I'm going to do a special stream, and it's mainly going to be about the Carl Benjamin Sargon of Akkad issue and how a party that won the European election last time, back in 2014, ended up with not a single seat this time. And most crucially, this isn't to attack anyone. This is what can we learn from this? How can we learn to approach campaigns in a much better way so that patriots can actually get off the internet and campaign, but do so in a way that wins genuine power and not just wastes everyone's time and money?
Always enjoy speaking with you, Mark. Thanks for coming on today, mate.
Thank
particularly
you so
short
much.
notice. Speak soon, and bye for now. Mark Collett live on the line to us there from Leeds, I believe. Good to have Mark back on the programme. 4 minutes past the hour. Brief musical interlude. When we come back, Mel Vee will join the programme. The Conscious Consumer Network. We're going to be talking about satanic ritual abuse, and you're going to find this very interesting indeed. Back with Mel in a couple of minutes.
I'm a real wild one. Wild one. Wild one. Wild one. Wild one.
Iggy Pop on the Richie Allen Show, Europe's most listened to independent radio show. The time is exactly 6 minutes past 6. It is Tuesday, May 28th, 2019. It is always good to be with you. That's the cliche, but I mean it. Thanks for tuning into the programme. You can tweet me, it's at Richie Allen Show, and I'll be glad to hear from you this particular Tuesday. Right, let's introduce my next guest. I'm really looking forward to meeting her for the first time. Before I say hello to her, I was thinking today that if you mentioned satanic ritual abuse to somebody these days, you'll probably be met with skepticism, maybe a bit of bemusement, and maybe even a bit of indifference. Now, old radio colleagues of mine would say, Richie, this was the satanic panic in the United States, wasn't it, Richie? False memory syndrome. It's a nonsense, they would say. And they might point me to the case of Carl Beach. This is an ongoing case. This is the man who was known as Nick, who made allegations about former UK Prime Minister Edward Heath back in 2014. And he's on trial now. And it's being alleged that he is a fantasist, that he is himself a child abuser, and that the stories he told about child murder are just a pack of lies. Are they? I don't know. I've been covering this for many, many years. I've interviewed victims of abuse who told me horrifying accounts of witnessing satanic rituals where they saw children being abused, tortured, and even murdered. I've always kept my opinion out of it. I've never endorsed anybody. I've just listened to people. I've also interviewed therapists who, while not endorsing the accounts of their patients, told me their patients believed what they were telling their therapist. That's very interesting, that. So therapists have been on this programme, more than one. They didn't endorse their patient's claims, but said they believed the patient was telling the truth, at least as they understood it. Now, I've had that experience as an interviewer. I've met people whom I believed very strongly were sincere and believed what they were telling me, but equally, I've met people whom I didn't think were that credible. So what if satanic ritual abuse is still happening, is happening? What if those who wished to cover it up were perpetrating hoaxes on you and on me? You know what I mean by that? You set up somebody to claim that they were a victim of satanic ritual abuse, and then you disprove their claims very easily. Why would anybody do that? Well, maybe to supplant in people's minds that it's all a fantasy. Let's welcome Mel Vee to the show. Mel is an investigative journalist, author and documentarian. She also co-founded and is the creative director of Conscious Consumer Network, which, as I'm sure many of our listeners know, is an independent television network that has been running for 5 years and is doing very well. Mel, welcome to the programme. How are you?
Hi, Richie. Thank you for having me on.
Delighted to have you on. And I could have mentioned in the intro that we're going to explore how this is treated in the press, but also how this is treated in the so-called alternative media here in the UK and elsewhere as well. It's great to have you on, and congratulations on the success that you've had in 5 years with the TV network. You've done really well, Mel.
Thank you, Richie. It actually has been very much up and down for very much similar reasons to what you've mentioned, and that, you know, we've explored a lot of this information, and it's a precarious little gauntlet of challenge because you're always having to weigh it all up, look for the evidence, and often, as is the case with supposed victims of SRA, the evidence doesn't really stick around for very long after these events happen. There's a very real lack of physical evidence. So you are relying largely on witness testimonies only. And, you know, when you're trying to do the right thing, which is to expose something you believe to be horrific, I've had to go back on a few people who've come onto our network and go, well, actually, you know what, I don't 100% think that is legitimate. Or, you know, I've had to look further than just having them on. I've then had to go digging afterwards. And it's not just the victims. There is an entire network of people who have kind of, very sadly, in a way, it's almost like a morbid curiosity, latched onto this sickness and made a kind of industry out of it. And these people are also helping to perpetuate the whole mess. So I guess that's what we're here to talk about today. Definitely.
You make a very good point about victims and the authenticity of their claims, particularly the difficulty of proving the authenticity. I've always, as somebody who grew up in commercial radio, which is not a bad thing because you learn, particularly from those of yesteryear who've been around for a long time, they instill in you a set of values as a broadcaster. And I've always taken people on to speak about these things, but first of all, never endorsed them, in terms of never said to my audience, listen, you have to believe this person, they're telling the truth. You can never do that as a broadcaster. You can just say, right, I've got Michelle on, and she's on from Canada. She's got a story to tell. Have a listen to what she's going to say, and we'll ask her a couple of questions. Never endorsed it, but you made a great point. It's difficult then when asking the likes of Michelle, have you got any material evidence that you can present us to demonstrate to us that this really happened? And you do that as gently and as compassionately as you can, and ultimately you finish the interview and you let the audience make their own mind up on whether what they heard was real, was genuine, or whether or not it was nonsense. It's a very difficult area. Before we get into the industry that you've described it as, you believe and have come to believe over the years that satanic ritual abuse is a real thing. Do you want to give our audience a kind of a Cliff Note version of what it is? Don't worry about the time of day. If people have got young children in the room, I would advise you either turn off the programme and pick it up later on, or take the children out of the room. I'm giving you that warning now. Mel, what is it? Give us a definition of what SRA is.
Thank you, Richie. Well, let me be clear here, and that I think that the term satanic ritual abuse is kind of misleading. It actually should be termed cult ritual abuse, because this kind of abuse is not necessarily isolated to those who practice the tenets of Satanism. In fact, if you go and read Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible, it doesn't once mention the kind of ritual sacrifice and abuse that we've become used to hearing about in these circles. In fact, you get more mentions of sacrifice and abuse and punishment of all kinds in the actual Bible than you do in the Satanic Bible. First point. Second point, abuse within cults. It doesn't matter what cult it is. It could be the Roman cult, and I reference obviously the Roman Catholic Church, where they abuse young boys, and it's covered up under the law of criminals solicitationis, where the priests actually protect each other. And there's a reason for this, because this kind of abuse is a rite of passage that has been practiced and goes back thousands of years. As long as religion, cultism, ritual has been going on, this practice has been going on. And there's so much evidence documented in ancient literature, in ancient artworks. It's far older than us. And it's very much is a rite of passage of sort of the inner members of these kind of world-dominating cults that come out of things like the Roman Catholic Church. So I must be clear in saying that it's not just limited to Satanism, it's cultism. And cultism includes religion and all the other cults that come with it, including things like, for example, Scientology, where there is a lot of abuse going on. And there are some very famous people, such as Leah Remini, who's done a wonderful job in exposing those kind of abuses within the organization of Scientology. So again, I just want to impress on people, it's not a satanic thing, and they talk about satanic panic, because I think that's the thing that most people identify evil with. Yeah. It's actually a cult thing, and it goes across many different cults, from Satanism to Scientology, to the Roman Catholic Church, to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, as I discovered when I was 22. I've been through a ritual abuse episode myself. And I, back then, didn't know it had anything to do with Satanism. So that is the clearest definition I can give to people, and to say that this stuff actually does go on.
So it's important for people like me who have a limited understanding, it's important to grasp that it's not unique to Satanism. While it goes on in satanic circles, it's not unique. It's a more broadly, it's a horrible thing to say, but it's a more broad practice. It's not just Satanism, it's in religions, it's in Christianity, in terms of the Catholic Church and elsewhere. Do you want to talk a little bit for a couple of minutes about yourself? Mel, you said the Advent Church, you had an experience. What happened?
Yeah, Seventh-day Adventist Church. This is not really the topic of the conversation that I want to get into. I have made this public knowledge before, and it came back to bite me. So I actually withdrew this information from the public realm. But I have first-hand experience with it. As I said, I was 22 at the time, and it's a very painful thing to talk about. And perhaps one day when my mom and dad have passed on and my baby brother's a little bit bigger, I'll come out again and speak about it, because obviously I don't want it to negatively affect them. My brother's extremely high profile, and I never want this kind of thing to smack him in the face. But I do want to say that this stuff is very real. It does go on. And what we need to do is deconfuse ourselves from the titular narrative. Oh, it's satanic. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that. All religion comes from a common origin. And this, of course, I put forward in my various works. People can check out my body of work called Dragonology and see all the proof and evidence I've laid out, documentary series, lecture series, books. It's all there. There's plenty of material for you to see just how all religions and all cults ultimately answer to the same point. They all come to the same point of the proverbial control triangle, or the pyramid of control. All religions come from a common origin, which is ophiolatry, serpent or dragon worship. That is the root of all religion, and that is the point from which all religions evolved. So it doesn't matter which religion you're talking about, whether it's Satanism, whether it's Catholicism, you're talking about cultism. That's why we have to redefine satanic ritual abuse as cult ritual abuse.
How does it manage to happen in 2019 without the public becoming aware of it? Because we're talking about children going missing. We're talking about children being selected and handpicked by people for these ceremonies, these dreadful things, these unspeakable things. My listeners will be wondering, how the hell, in the digital age, in the age of social media and cameras everywhere, how can this go on today, Mel?
That's a very good question, and there's no easy answers. And whatever I say, I'm going to reap the ire of somebody, because people just don't want to believe the truth. That's the honest reality. But unfortunately, cult ritual abuse is the cornerstone of cultism. It's part of a historical ceremony, ritual, rite of passage, whatever you want to call it. It's part of this archaeolic culture that has existed not just this iteration of civilization, but in past antediluvian civilizations and probably several iterations of civilization. As far back as you can trace humanity, agriculture, and ritual, you can trace sacrifice and satanic ritual abuse or cult ritual abuse.
And are we talking about the haves in society? Are we talking about the elite of society being the more likely to be participating in this sort of thing?
To be honest with you, I am not going to stigmatize any group of people, because I think that kind of gives an idea that it's only those people. Yeah. This sort of stuff goes on, I think, in places that most people wouldn't even expect. And there are a lot of people who perhaps want to climb up through society, who get involved with these things because they believe that there's some kind of power to be gotten from it, some kind of supernatural powers, gaining favor with some kind of deity, which would perhaps elevate them. And what you find is these sort of people who go looking outside themselves for power and validation, they themselves are actually really soul sick. So, that doesn't necessarily limit itself to the elites. However, I do believe that those who control it at the very top, obviously very wealthy and very powerful, to be able to keep this very in-depth esoteric knowledge under wraps in the way that they've done. If it was just widespread and rampant, obviously it would be more in our faces. We wouldn't even be having this discussion. It would just be, okay, it's an acknowledged fact. But it is a very sacred ritual, very sacred practice, and there's very specific reasons why it is done. And these reasons and rights and abilities are not just granted to anyone. They're not granted to what we call neophytes or new initiates. You have to work your way through. You have to prove yourself. And sometimes that comes with doing some very horrible things. And this is why you've got things like degrees in various secret societies. And for example, the Freemasons, you've got a number of degrees you have to go through. And then you think, whilst you're going through the degrees, there's only 33 degrees. And then you get to the 33rd degree. And if they see you have a propensity towards perhaps something a little bit more in the dark side, they will take you further. But the majority of Freemasons in the world have no idea that there's anything beyond 33 degrees. So it's not like it's completely open to everybody. But if you go to a Freemason's lodge and you attend an open evening, they will tell you, we cannot turn away anybody who wants to be a Freemason. We can highly recommend against it. But if you want to join and pay the fees, you can join. That means anybody can join the Masons. How far you go, however, is another story.
Mel Vee is our guest. This is fascinating. We're going to be talking in a minute about the industry that has grown up around this particular issue, with particular focus on the independent or the alternative media. I know your website is under reconstruction. It'll be back online in a couple of days' time, the Conscious Consumer Network. I'll put links on Twitter to where you can read more about Mel if this is the first time you've heard her, and where you can find her books as well. We've got Alexis J overseeing the independent inquiry into child sex abuse here in the UK. I've heard from many people over the years who believe that not just in Westminster here, of course, in the UK, but also in DC, that a very powerful paedophile network has been operating. Now, I know this is slightly stepping away from cult abuse, let's call it that, satanic ritual abuse, cult abuse, but do you believe that it is a real thing, that it has happened and is happening, that these paedophile rings do operate in and around the corridors of power? Westminster paedophile rings, the paedophile rings that we've heard about in the US. Do you give credence or credit to those claims, Mel?
I do think that they're in existence. And absolutely, yes, it is going on. Yes, it is being covered up. There's too many people who've come forward with some very scary information that unfortunately has been validated. And then, of course, they tried to cover it all up. I myself, when I worked in mainstream media in London, got to experience the quashing of an ITV documentary into paedophiles in Parliament and I think that was done by, I'm actually not going to mention the name in case you get sued, but a very high-ranking politician who's still in the government now and was an advisor to Tony Blair at the time, and stepped in at ITV to actually squash the broadcasting of this independent investigative piece which was going to go out. So even back before I woke up, I knew that there was something going on, but I didn't kind of understand the bigger context of it. So to answer your question, yes, I do believe this is going on. I know from my own experience prior to waking up that this was going on, and I know from my own experience as a kid that this is going on. So yeah, it is going on, but what's even more scary is, as an investigative journalist, realizing this stuff is going on, coming into contact with numerous people who claim to have been satanically ritually abused. I myself have interviewed a number of them. What I will say, the real sad and sickening thing is I've had to pull more testimonies and interviews for being fake than I've been able to put out real ones. Because there is, for whatever reason, a real energetic hit or a vampiring effect, or it's a kind of, I can't even begin to imagine what it would take for someone to make up something this disgusting. But there are those people out there who are genuinely sick attention seekers, and they think of this as the only way to get famous or to get a bit of attention or notoriety. Oh, poor me, look what happened to me, the most ghastly thing that could ever really happen. You know, and I can use a few examples of people I've had to pull interviews from, because I realized after dealing with them and after putting out the interview that there's something very wrong with their story. And before you do that, man, let me just read an interesting comment. Very good friend of mine and a big help to me is the actress Jean-Anne Crowley. And Jean-Anne is listening to this with interest, and she says, leaving cults aside, there does appear to be a massive market for child trafficking. Presume a great many of them end up in paedophile circles, satanic or otherwise, she says. And then she talked a little bit about Ronald Bernard, who was a Dutch politician who drew the line as he was climbing in his career when it came to ritual child abuse, and gave very interesting testimony about it on YouTube last year in April. That's really interesting stuff. Mel Vee is our guest. He was a Dutch banker, not a Dutch politician. Yes. Thanks for making the Jean-Anne just came back to me there, Dutch banker. Right, so let's stay with this because this is important and the time is absolutely flying as it does. We're going to be talking about one or two independent media organisations. I'm sure it will trigger one or two people. But I'll help put it into context as we go along, because one of the people we're going to mention has been offered right of reply by me on this programme several times. He then came back to demand right of reply, saying that he was he felt very hurt and that he was wronged on this programme. And I said, no problems, you can come on, let's do it. And then he disappeared because he doesn't really want to come on. And we'll get to him and his organisation in a minute. If I was involved in doing the sorts of things that you've been researching, one of the things I would do, not because I'm evil, but because I'm intelligent. Well, of course, if I was doing those things, I would be evil, but I'm not, and I'm not evil. But if I was involved in that sort of thing, I would say, right, let's create a few hoaxes. Let's put some stuff in the public domain that is patently and utterly ridiculous. We'll put it out there. We will then demonstrate it to be ridiculous, and we will put in the minds of the public the notion that claims of ritual abuse are the work of fantasists. That's what I would do. Now, you think that we've seen some of that in recent years. We've seen crazy stories put into the public domain, but you're also concerned that the independent media have cashed in on it, or at least some aspects of it have, and have turned it into a bit of an industry. For sure. Absolutely. I've got plenty of proof of this. First off, you need to understand that as someone who runs a network with multiple broadcasters and has done for some time, I see when the viewing figures go up. Sadly, more viewers tune in after every false flag. That's when our viewing figures go up. Okay, people are innately addicted to fear and drama because that's how we've been programmed by mainstream media and society. You know, and this unfortunately has the knock-on effect of, you know, the mainstream or alternative media have latched onto the most horrific elements, and they have fueled a number of hoaxes, some of which I myself have debunked. And of course, I've come under much attack and scrutiny for my not willing to stand by supposed victims of abuse. But that's not the case, because I myself have been the victim of abuse. So this is really about trying to discern who's got a valid story and who doesn't. Because those who don't have valid stories, what they do is they actually discredit and cause a lot of harm to those people who are trying to seek help, who are trying to get their stories out there, and who are credible, because it kind of makes the whole thing look totally ridiculous.
Let's talk about Hampstead then. Let's talk about Hampstead. Let's talk about Hampstead Heath. This came up. I think you're more likely to have a better memory than me. When did we first hear about this? 2014, was it? 2014.
Yes, it was 2014, and it was actually on the back of the so-called Holly Gregg hoax. Now, the Holly Gregg hoax was a hoax that I was the first journalist to come out and say that is a hoax, because I investigated it. Holly named a number of people who had supposedly abused her, and when you start naming people that don't exist, your entire story falls apart, and she did. She named people that didn't exist. So, of course, I was the one that came out, first journalist to come out and go, well, hang on, something's not right here. And then, of course, it's the same group of people who were involved with the Holly Gregg hoax. Maybe all of them were very well-meaning. I'm not trying to discredit any of the people who were involved or speak ugly about them.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in there, Mel?
Sure.
I found Robert Greene to be immensely credible. Now, by immensely credible, I believe that Robert Greene believed the claims around Holly Gregg. Now, that's all I can say. I'd be a liar if I said that I knew this was true or that was true or not true. And I'm not just saying this because he passed away. I didn't know Robert Greene very well, but I interviewed him several times. And I've been interviewing people for many, many years on commercial and national radio. And I know when somebody believes what they're telling me. Robert Greene definitely believed it. That's not to say that he was right, but he definitely believed it. So I just wanted to put that in there. Go ahead.
I agree. I went all the way to Scotland to interview Robert Greene, and at the time I absolutely believed he was telling the truth. He believed what he was saying, and I believe this to his dying day. I believe he believed what he was saying was the truth. He is a good guy, and shame for him that he went through everything that he went through in the last years of his life. He really was a genuinely wonderful human being. I can't even tell you how kind he was to me in the time that we spent together. I really grew fond of him, and I felt sorry for him that when I had to eventually look at the evidence as an investigator, and I went to Robert first, and I said, I'm sorry, Robert, but I'm going to do this, and I feel very bad because you're a good person, but I just don't believe the story anymore based on such and such.
Fair enough. Well, you're entitled to that. Listen, your opinion is as valid as anybody else's, and nobody should be shot down for stating an opinion. For me, what I've read about Holly Gregg, I don't know. That's all I'm saying on it. I don't know. You're absolutely entitled to conclude what you've concluded. And I certainly don't think that you're any sort of shill or any of that old nonsense that they carry on with just because you come to a different conclusion. But let's stay with this, because this segues into Hampstead, which is dreadful on every level. Hampstead is dreadful. And I want you to talk about that, your experience of covering that, and why it's led you to conclude that the independent media is either knowing or unknowing, but either way is enabling the creation of hoaxes in order to discredit real cases. Go ahead.
Okay, so firstly, I lived in Hampstead for about 5 years. I lived on Downshire Hill, which is a road that runs adjacent to the Heath, and my time there was very, very weird. There were things that went on during my time in Hampstead, so that when the story came out, I was like, yeah, absolutely, I believe it, because I had this and this and this experience. I had context. However, with everything that's come out, I have since, again, and I do have the right to change my mind as soon as new information presents itself, as all journalists do, and I've come to reconsider my stance on whether or not that story was in fact legitimate. What I will say is that whether it's true or not, when we take the evidence, for example, something like the Holly Gregg, which segues into this, I just want to make a point here. I took the evidence that I had to one of the biggest pushers, which is the UK column. I took all the evidence I had to the UK column, and I said to them, why are you still pushing this story? Because look at this and this. Have you read this, and this? Just consider this and this. Just consider the evidence. And I was viciously and brutally attacked. In fact, I was quite saddened at the way in which I was attacked. I was called a disabled person. I mean, they really got ugly with me. And I just said, hang on, I'm just asking you to consider all the information because you could be pushing a hoax here. And this is what I found, is there is this real aggression and animosity from these people who have been pushing these hoaxes, a reluctance to look at anything that contradicts their point of view.
Why? Because they've made a living out of it. Because this is the accusation I've levelled, not just at these particular guys. And I mean, they're a very benign group in terms of their reach and in terms of their credibility anyway. But this is very serious because this was obviously a ridiculous and almost laughable hoax, this. And you went to them and said, look, here we are. This is, you guys are being hoodwinked here, or you're going down the wrong road on this. And rather than take it on board, they very aggressively pushed back and said, no, this is real.
They aggressively push back and they attack you and they get personal. No point that I ever get personal with anybody. I was just asking everyone to consider all the evidence. I'm not intending to change anybody's mind. I'm not invested in what anyone else thinks. I don't care. Yeah. All I'm saying is, if you're going to push a hoax, please, if you're doing this kind of thing and you're putting these stories into the mainstream media, at least consider all the evidence. That's the ethical thing you can do as a journalist. That's the only ethical thing. You can't be playing one side, potentially causing damage to innocent people whilst not looking at all the evidence.
So did you conclude, because I certainly did, and this is a bit unfair because the man involved, the ex-Navy guy who runs this Mickey Mouse organisation on the South Coast, refuses to debate this publicly. He emailed me some months ago on a kind of a high horse, demanding access, and I said, no problems, come on, but here are some questions I'm going to ask you. And then he disappeared off the face of the earth. Doesn't want to come on. So he's not here. The right of reply has been offered. I believe that this guy is a dangerous liar and knew for a fact that the Ella Draper story was nonsense. I believe that he knew it was nonsense, but pushed it anyway. I don't believe he's working for the establishment. I don't believe he's working for the government. I don't believe any of that nonsense. But I believe in the truth or industrial complex. These guys dine out on this stuff. It's how they make their living. And yes. I believe that he knew the story was absolute crap from the get-go. Did you conclude that, or do you give him more of a pass than me? Do you think he believed it?
What I know is that even when given the evidence to the contrary, they refuse to look at it. Okay, so why not, if you're genuinely in this for the right reasons, why wouldn't you consider all the evidence?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There's no coming back. As a journalist, you are finished. If you're involved in pushing something that turns out to be untrue, that's bad enough. But yes. If it can be demonstrated that you pushed something that was untrue knowingly, you are finished. Nobody in 1,000 years will ever take anything that you offer as evidence about anything. Nobody will ever take it seriously. That's all you have as a journalist, is your integrity. And if these guys on the South Coast were pushing this Hampstead thing for reasons of growing their own channel or for associating themselves as some sort of crusaders against child abuse, well, they're finished. They would be finished in the minds of most reasonable or kind of right-minded people. So you think the jury's out for you then? Is that what you said, whether they knew or whether they didn't know?
Well, I'm not sure whether they knew or whether they didn't know, because I only speak of what I can categorically prove, because that's the way I am as a journalist. What I will say is that when offered concrete evidence, they refuse to look at it because it could potentially contradict their version of what they put out, which could be ego, most likely had something to do with the income that they were receiving based upon putting this information out. And it's endemic all the way down. It's not just the media outlets. There's a whole industry that's grown up around satanic ritual abuse, including a whole slew of so-called therapists who engage in things like matrix rewriting and matrix imprinting therapies, where they go and they plant false memories into people's heads and make a lot of money doing this. And some of these therapists are earning 15,000 euros per speaking event. So it is an industry. They're making money talking about satanic ritual abuse. So of course they're not going to come out and say, well, actually this and this story may not be true, because they're some of the most high profile stories out there, supposedly giving credibility to their platform upon which they earn money. So this is why they're reluctant to step away from it, because not only does it damage their credibility, it damages their income and, of course, their precious little egos.
But one of the things that's that I can say as a statement of fact. It isn't conjecture. And I've pursued them fairly aggressively on this point. And not just me, but other journalists and other YouTube bloggers who've come on this particular programme, is the story about Melanie Shaw, who's a terribly unfortunate woman, whom was no doubt abused at Beechwood Care Home in Nottingham, whom was no doubt treated very badly when she was in foster care and in the system, and didn't get the help that she needed. They never do. People like that, not just here, but in Ireland as well. And they end up with some problems when they enter adulthood and they're on their own. And I had Melanie on the programme some years ago. I kind of regretted it because I didn't think that she was herself. I didn't think that she was in the best state of mind to be doing live radio. And what I discovered very quickly was that this group of people on the South Coast were pushing this disgraceful lie that Melanie was being locked up in prison in this country on no charges, on the whims of prosecutors who wanted to keep her locked up so that she couldn't name names in terms of high-profile politicians from the 80s and 90s. Now, this is patently and provably a lie. Melanie was locked up for crimes that she committed in her neighbourhood against her neighbours, like a lot of people who end up in her situation, and I have the utmost sympathy for her. I wouldn't blame her for any of it. She was prone to violence, and she did some things. She wasn't a good girl. She behaved badly, and she's gotten into trouble with the law, and that's the truth of it. She's not locked up in any prison to keep her quiet about naming names. I mean, you and I have been around the block. Even if Melanie was naming names, the establishment couldn't give a damn. You know? No. Why would they care? You know, people have named names for years. People were people like David Icke back in the early 1990s was naming people like Edward Heath and others. People have named names. And what they've done, these people, the establishment, is they've just laughed or shrugged it off. So I've no doubt that even if Melanie was naming names, that nobody would care too much. I mean, who's going to listen to Melanie Shaw anyway? So what they've done, this group on the coast, the South Coast, is they've exploited this woman and made capital, or attempted to make capital on her dreadfully unfortunate situation. And I've gone after that particular story more than the Hampstead story, because that's glaringly obvious. I mean, we know why Melanie is in prison. And but look, not to spend all the time bashing them. As you've said, it is endemic in the so-called independent media.
Yes, it is, unfortunately. And I just want to say that the independent media or alternative media is no different to mainstream media. I worked in London in mainstream media for a number of years. I was a professional model, television presenter. I had my own show on UK TV Style. I got to see just how evil mainstream media was for myself, which is why I moved into independent media after I kind of had an awakening of consciousness when I was 33. So I get how the parallels between the two are actually very much the same. It's all about, creating a name for yourself. It's all about making money and every other narcissistic trait that comes with straight, normal mainstream media comes with alternative media. And when I worked in mainstream media, one of the things that I noticed, particularly when I was working and producing reality TV shows, it's largely very unstable, emotionally unstable, psychologically unwell people that apply to go onto reality TV shows because they don't value themselves. They only value themselves how other people value them. They have an external locus of identity. And it's very much the same here in alternative media. And as a result, producers in mainstream media sometimes victimize and abuse people who actually shouldn't be anywhere on TV because they're not psychologically capable of dealing with the fallout. And there's just been a very big case in Holland where a couple have come out saying, look, we were victimized by the production crew. They did terrible things to us. They played it for maximum drama, and the way they edited ended up making us both look terrible. And, they were feeling a bit suicidal over the whole thing. I can't tell you how many times I saw that happening whilst I was working in mainstream media, which is why I walked away from it. Okay, but it happens in alternative media too.
Of course it does. And look, I can testify, having had a commercial radio career, as I alluded to earlier on. Here's something I said to you today. Let's just say that, okay, in the independent media, you've got not in every corner of it, but in many areas of it, you've got self-promoting snake oil salesmen who exploit real situations. Okay, here's the thing I said to you today. let's stop blaming the likes of pathological liars like Brian Gerrish. Let's stop blaming guys like that. And I really mean this. I don't blame Gerrish anymore. I blame the morons who support him. And you know, the funny thing about this is we live in this world now where right and wrong and facts and figures don't matter anymore. It's all about feelings, subjective feelings about things. So I'll get one or two, not many, because these people, their audience, their scope, the scope of their reach is very negligible anyway. But I'll get one or two emails from people going, I can't believe you're attacking these. I'm not attacking them. I'm talking about factual things. I'm highlighting how and when these people have told lies knowingly for a reason. I'm not attacking them. I don't know them personally. I've never met any of these people. Couldn't care less about them. Never met them. But I get one or two. And the mind boggles. You think to yourself, well, it's not their fault. It's not the truth or industrial complex. It's not their fault, Mel. It's the morons who support it. People are worse than the likes of Brian Gerrish. The people who watch it and the people who buy into it.
Well, it's the same argument. Do you blame the preacher, or do you blame the church attendance for the corruption that is religion? Okay,
Yeah.
Everybody has a part to play, and this is to me became very obvious when I started seeing things when I was living in the Netherlands. Foundations being set up with hundreds and thousands of euros going towards foundations set up to combat satanic ritual abuse. But let me ask you, how do you combat something like that? It just ended up being a bunch of new age nut jobs, not being funny, running around all over the world, trying to make some kind of difference, but actually just making it even worse, because what they were doing was victimizing people who were abused, and when they themselves actually didn't have the skills to deal with these people. And I'm watching this happen now as well with the so-called therapists in the movement. They don't have the correct training. They're not qualified. They're not recognized by the various medical boards that operate these therapies. And I've been in touch with all of the ones in the UK, the Health and Care Professional Council, the UK Council for Psychotherapy, the Parliamentary Health Ombudsman, and the mental health charity called Mind. And many of them are very well aware of the psychosis. And it's a real gauntlet of challenges. It's trying to decipher the facts from the fiction. And what these people are doing is they're making such a hash job mess of it behind the scenes, such as all those people who got involved with the Hampstead case. That what it does is it taints it in such a way that people don't even want to go there anymore. Me as a journalist, I'm petrified of touching anything that has SRA written on it, because how do you prove it if there isn't actual physical evidence?
Yeah, because you see, I interviewed Sabine McNeill, and I like Sabine. I have a lot of sympathy for what happened to her. I really do. And I don't think that Sabine McNeill is evil. I don't think that she belongs in prison. Again, I believe that Sabine believed the people whom told her those stories. I think she believed them. And one of my conversations with her, I'll never forget, the woman was in absolute, she was in chaos, really. Personally, was in personal turmoil, because she was very deeply affected by what she believed had happened to those children. And I feel sorry for her where she ended up. But to me, from the very beginning, the story was ridiculous. And it's not because I don't think that people can do unspeakable things to people, and it's not because I don't think these things have happened in the past. I do. Like I said, I've interviewed people whom I am convinced believe the stories they've told me. But this one, to me, was an obvious red herring, Mel. It was obviously thrown in there at a very, 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 very special time when we were all talking about the unspeakable things done by people like Jimmy Savile and Jimmy Savile's connection to the royal family and all of that really interesting stuff that we should have been talking about. And all of a sudden, there's this story about teachers eating children. Yeah. And I remember thinking, as you know, I'm a semi nice guy. I'm a grumpy old bastard at the best of times, but I'm a semi decent guy. So when I'm listening to Sabine McNeill, I'm gentle. I'm saying, you know, I can't imagine that's going on. Why do you believe it so much? And then I reach out to the Draper woman and say, look, you've got to come on. And then the telltale giveaway, they would only come on so long as I undertook from the beginning to believe them. Mm-hmm. That's the truth. Yes. From the beginning, yes. They wouldn't come on my program. I said, "Come on." Same thing. Yeah, unless you almost commit to believing our story, we're not coming on. And I said, "Well, you can go and feck off, as we say in Ireland. Of course not, I can't do that. I don't believe your story no more than I disbelieve it. I want to ask you questions about it. And they wouldn't come on. And it's not because they wouldn't come on that I took a turn against the story. It was the most ridiculous story.
Well, look, I feel sorry for Robert, and I liked Robert tremendously. I had a huge amount of respect for him. And when I interviewed Sabine, and I did interview Sabine, in fact, the police came to me and asked me for Sabine's interview because I'd taken it down when I realized the story wasn't real. They asked me for Sabine's interview, and I handed it over to them because I never want to be seen to not be participating with a police investigation, because everyone was saying, oh, the police aren't investigating the Hampstead thing. Well, no, they are. I know they are because they came to me directly and asked me for my evidence. So they did investigate. It's not that they were all in on it and they were all in on the baby eating thing and they were all trying to cover it up. No, these poor policemen in Hampstead were genuinely trying to investigate it and trying to keep the community from killing each other.
Here's the question for you, Mel. Were they investigating it for the very fact that it was a hoax? If that was going on, if children were being trafficked to be murdered in rituals, whether it's in Ireland, Scotland, England or Wales, do we think if it was going on, the police would really investigate? Because I'm sceptical there.
Look, I do think that the police have to take orders. So if it gets squashed from the very top, there's nothing more they can do. Yeah. That's what I know for a fact. Okay, so I think maybe a couple of policemen might take a few testimonies and they might investigate it further. But at some point down the line, perhaps someone higher up reaches down and goes, well, sorry, you can't go that route. And they have to shelve it because they are following orders. That's the way the police work. They have to follow orders, right? It's the same as being in the military. You follow orders, otherwise you get court-martialed. Yeah. It's the way it works.
And we know, don't we, that detectives working for the Met in this country went on the record, told Exaro News that they were stonewalled by their superiors when investigating certain prominent politicians, some alive and some dead. So that's a fairly honest answer. Mel Vee is our guest. We've only got about 5 minutes left on this. It's really, really interesting. I'll be very interested to see the reaction to this later on. There are people who believe that this is really going on and they get very emotionally attached to it. And these are not bad people. These are good people. These are decent people. They know that this is going on and has gone on. And when they hear somebody like you criticising a claim about SRA abuse or cult abuse, they automatically jump to the conclusion that you're trying to, divert people's attention away from it or whatever. No, that's not the case. The point Mel Vee has made to me today and has made on her own programmes is this is a real thing and it's gone on and is going on. Thousands of children go missing a year in the UK. Thousands. You don't hear about this on the BBC or Channel 4. Thousands go missing from foster care every year. More than 10,000. Read Ian Joseph's blog. Cross-reference all the links that he puts in his blog. It's all true. Where do these kids end up? Where do they end up? Some of these children are meeting horrific ends, I believe. And Mel Vee is talking about this, she's asking questions about this, but at the same time, there are people in what I call the truth or industrial complex. I didn't coin the phrase. It's been around a few years ago. In Boston came up with it. It's a wonderful phrase, though, to describe people who pose as independent or alternative media, but they're not really. They're there to exploit this. Go ahead, Mel.
No, they're not, because they lack basic common sense and investigative capacities. They have no right being in alternative media or being journalists because they're not. Okay, and what they do is they actually cause more confusion and more upset for people like me who are genuine victims and who know this stuff goes on, and we're having to face a barrage coming from people going, no, there's no such thing as satanic ritual abuse, it's all a hoax, because look what happened in Hampstead, look what happened with Holly Gregg, look at this one. Categorically, the whole thing, we're just going to sweep the top brush, the whole thing is fake and negative. And that's what is very important. That's the most important message to get across here, Richie, is yes, the stuff is going on, but yes, it's also a very pernicious, soul-sick group of people who are pushing these hoaxes and not doing their due diligence in looking into them. And perhaps it's because they are invested in their ego, their external identities, the money that they're getting. There's a number of reasons perhaps why they wouldn't want to compromise themselves. But the bottom line is that it's disrespectful to people who are genuine victims, and I speak as one of them myself.
Well, great to have you on the programme. I'm going to say it again. I've invited Brian Gerrish on this programme, and Gerrish ignored me. And then about 3, 4, even 5 months ago, 6 months ago it must be, his name came up on this programme because somebody else was on and they were talking about Hampstead and Melanie Shaw, particularly Melanie Shaw. I had some emails from Gerrish. I'm prepared to publish them, where Gerrish was playing the big man, demanding right of reply. And I said, listen, I'm a real journalist. Of course you can have right of reply. But I did say it's not going to go well for you, because I've got questions for you about who you are and your funding and money that you raised for Melanie Shaw. And I've got questions about Hampstead, and you're not going to like them. So name the day and come on the radio with me. And he disappeared. Mm-hmm. And that's the truth. And I've got the emails to back it up. I don't think I'll be hearing from Brian Gerrish again. As far as I understand, he's stopped talking about Melanie Shaw entirely. And that's what I've been told. I don't follow him or his organisation. I have no interest in it. But I understand that they don't even mention Melanie Shaw anymore because it is that embarrassing. Melanie, God love her, shouldn't be in jail. Okay, she should have been taken care of. Her problems and her societal problems are a direct result of the lack of care that she, or the care she didn't get when she was released from foster care. And she's got problems, that woman, and she's in prison for violence. She's not in prison to keep her from naming names in any paedophile inquiry. And these guys have dined out on that. They've pushed that hoax, and it's wrong. And I don't give a shit. Sorry for swearing, Mel. If you think it's the independent media and we should all be in it together, no, independent. You understand what independent means. Mel Vee is independent. I'm not endorsing Mel. She's not endorsing me. She's independent. If I find out in 6 weeks' time that Mel has told a whole pile of horse shit on the radio, I'll call her out for it. And vice versa. Independent media. Everybody's fair game. Mel, final word to you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Richie. It's been great to chat to you.
Well, that's brilliant. That was brief, Mel. Thanks very much. Listen, it's on YouTube. People just need to look for Conscious Consumer Network. There's nobody else. If you Google or put into YouTube Conscious Consumer Network, you will find Mel. Website's down, Mel, but it'll be back up in a couple of days. What's the URL for the website?
Actually, we're in the process of rebranding, and I would like to direct people to my Dragonology body of work, get an understanding of what cult ritualism is, where it stems from, and all of the allegories that surrounded the symbolism right the way back through to the first iterations of humanity. It's all there, so go to dragonology.info, and you can also check out that information in my body of work known as The Greatest Discovery, which is available on thegreatestdiscovery.world.
Mel, thanks so much for coming on today. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Thank you. And bye for now. That was Mel Vee live on your Richie Allen Show. Really interesting stuff that there is a truth or industrial complex. It is actively engaged in exploiting the victims of abuse, of ritual abuse for its own end. And it has to be called out where it is obvious. Conscious Consumer Network is where you'll find Mel on YouTube. I've got lots of really interesting guests coming up on the programme this week, but because I'm really running out of time, I can't tell you about them, so I'm just going to have to leave the programme. Oh, still bedding in at the new studio. It's all fun and games here. Look after yourselves and one another. Thanks so much to Mel Vee, and thanks again to Mark Collett for the first hour. Until tomorrow, Wednesday at 5. Bye for now. Bye now.